Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Today we are getting into some risers and fallers as draft season has progressed. Only a couple weeks left of draft season before toe meets rubber on the start of the season. So we got to do a little price check, see about some guys that we were buying a lot of earlier this offseason, and now maybe we've cooled on a little bit, and then also the other end of that spectrum, some guys that we were fading earlier in the summer that now have become targets. Let's start the show. Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. This podcast presented by our good friends over at Circa Resort and Casino. Today we are going to be digging into some risers and fallers over the course of draft season. Some guys that we were maybe targeting pretty aggressively earlier on in the offseason with our drafts that now we've maybe pressed pause on a little bit. And then on the back half of the show, we're going to dive into some players that, hey, we're coming around on a little bit, maybe trying to get some more of as we round out our best ball shares, and also, of course, our redrafts leagues as well. So, Mario, where do you want to begin? I think we've talked a decent amount backstage about where we want to get rolling with this, and a player that kind of framed this perfectly to you is Pat Freiermuth, as someone that maybe you're targeting more aggressively earlier on, that now it's no, hold off.
Yeah, so it's a bummer because, like I said, I already drafted a little bit of Freiermuth, mostly back in the early half of the summer, and I think he's a good player. So it's not as if there's a good reason exactly for this to be the case, but I feel like the Steelers are going to use Freiermuth for a lot of blocking this year. Our guy, Broderick Jones, looked pretty rough in that preseason game, was kind of getting, granted, Greg Rousseau just could be a beast himself, but Broderick Jones was getting rocked. So you can imagine Freiermuth staying in, especially in these 2-3 tight end formation things. He's going to be their lead pass catcher among the tight ends for sure, and he might somehow eke out still that second leading route runner on the Steelers behind Pickens. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers add somebody. And I wouldn't be surprised if Freiermuth, again, is kind of just stuck doing a lot of pass blocking at best. Or I could imagine a lot of his routes that could otherwise be viable, intermediate routes, turning into plays where instead he chips the defensive end and then just kind of hangs out in the flats. And unlike a guy like Jonnu Smith at Tennessee, who sometimes had some big games in that kind of usage, Freiermuth's not really a yards after the catch guy. So
right.
I'm worried that it's just going to be, particularly if that offensive line is worse than I previously expected. I'm worried that Freiermuth is just going to kind of do a lot of buying time for an even more stripped down passing game.
So I guess one path in which maybe it doesn't hurt him so much is, they did also draft Darnell Washington last year, and he's big, and I think that he profiles as someone that might be like first in line as far as like the blocking tasks among tight ends is concerned.
Oh, yeah.
So they still get some usage out of Freiermuth in the passing game because, yeah, it's a pretty threadbare, pass catching group once you get beyond Pickens and Freiermuth. So I think just out of necessity, I think maybe the floor will still be there for Freiermuth, but I don't know your thoughts on that potentially being an outcome.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be just the same way Jonnu Smith was used in Tennessee, which is to say, not that he was blocking all the time the way a Darnell Washington or a Tip Raymond would, but Jonnu Smith generally would do a lot of chipping because they were generally trying to do, like 5-step drops where they throw deep intermediate in-breaking routes to A.J. Brown and Corey Davis. So in the case of Jonnu Smith, there was the yards after the catch. And in Freiermuth's case, I'm just expecting less yards after the catch, even though he might, he might eke out something like 60 catches, but I'm worried even in that case, it might be for something like 525 yards and like maybe 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, we're not expecting a ton of passing touchdowns from this offense. So the ceiling was already a little bit precarious.
I also think they might trade for
best.
someone
So
like Tim Patrick or like, oh, sorry. I think we had a bit of a connection issue there for a second. I think they might trade for someone like Tim Patrick or Bo Melton or something like that too. And yeah, I think Freiermuth's just going to be kind of hanging out in the flats.
Well, so if we're pressing pause on acquiring Freiermuth shares, who is your new pivot?
Sorry. Yeah, I guess I don't know how bad our connection is glitching here. Hopefully I'm not too far back. As far as I don't know, instead of Freiermuth, I guess I'm just waiting, not too long, but just waiting instead for Ben Sinnott, who I think is still going way too late at tight end. Don't get me wrong. You don't want to depend on Sinnott even as a tight end 2 in best ball, for instance, because we don't know how long this ridiculous Zach Ertz thing is going to go on. But I do think, whereas Freiermuth is kind of severely limited by his circumstances, I think Sinnott, if the Washington offense struggles the way I think it will, and I'm pretty sure it will, they're going to need some yards after the catch at tight end, especially, and Sinnott can do that. Ertz can't. So it's kind of exchanging for an even lower floor, but I think for quite a lot more upside.
All right, let's move on over to a receiver that maybe we're slowing down on. That's Keenan Allen in Chicago. So I think maybe the initial expectation was, he's locked in to be the number 2 target there in Chicago. Obviously, an improved passing game, but as the offseason has unfolded, some less than glowing reports about Keenan Allen in camp, and on the inverse of that, Rome Odunze, the rookie, looking pretty awesome thus far and looking like he has a legit connection with Caleb Williams. We holding off a little bit here on Keenan?
Yeah, and for me, this, if I'm right to be worried about Keenan now, it's a little bit of a dodge bullet because I haven't been drafting Keenan Allen to this point, but I was anxious about it. I was like, I don't want to fade the guy. He was just murderously good last year for the Chargers, but I just don't think that with his age trending the way that it is, losing the familiarity with Justin Herbert, and those guys worked on a level almost, comparable to like Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, something like that. So 32 and a half, it's not the age you want to be on a new offense with Rome Odunze. And if Keenan's pushing 230 now, then he's probably running like a 4.7.
Yeah, I think so too. So I'm a little bit worried, and I think I was already a little bit dubious on him this year because I didn't expect him to have like a ton of yards or touchdowns. Maybe he'd be more useful on like a DraftKings type of format, but I worry about a lesser version of him, and I was already a little bit concerned about the durability and the age on top of it. So, it's all kind of coming together as this, perfect storm a little bit to where I think I'm with you, and I'm not really aggressively targeting Keenan Allen much more. Staying in a kind of similar range of the ADP, early on, I was convinced that Ladd McConkey was like the best pick you could make it at his range, somewhere in like the mid 6, anywhere up there, maybe even late 5th in some instances. I feel like I have cooled on him. I feel like the market has cooled on him. We got the dreaded down arrow in our ADP report over on RotoWire when it comes to McConkey this year. So I think the Herbert injury this preseason is not a great sign, and McConkey himself isn't the most durable player, and I think people are starting to realize that a little bit, and therefore maybe it's not as much of a lock that he's that wide receiver 1 in LA right away.
Right. It was always a little weird that the market, to the degree that it did, assumed McConkey would be the wide receiver 1 there. We were both McConkey fans. We still are. But he missed a few practices with some kind of leg tweak, which was, like you said, the kind of thing that he would have happen sometimes at Georgia. And more importantly, Herbert missing so much time with the plantar fascia tear or whatever. So particularly early in the year, I don't know, let's say the first half of the year, it's going to be, I think, Josh Palmer who's better situated to work with Herbert. And McConkey, I think, still has a pretty decisive talent advantage. And I think you might see McConkey become more the wide receiver 1 in the second half of the year. at that point, having enough time with Herbert to kind of catch up on, the lost lessons. But I do think in the meantime, it's just, the Chargers, while they're going to throw the ball a lot more than they did with, previous Greg Roman offenses, they're still going to try to win with running the ball, playing defense, being very conscious of field positioning and stuff. So if you're not going to be throwing the ball a lot to offset, to create more pass attempts, to distribute more targets, I think in the meantime, some people are going to get pinched, and it's probably the guys who, are new to the team and new to the quarterback.
Yeah, so all of those I think are pretty legitimate concerns with McConkey at this stage of the draft season. Before we get on to our next guy that we're cooling off on, got a quick message from our friends over at Circa. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back. Circa Survivor and Circa Million are now up to $16 million in guaranteed prizes, 2 ways to win, and no rake. Circa Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. Last the longest to win it all with $10 million guaranteed. In Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed, quarterly and full season payouts. Enter Nevada, play from anywhere. Visit circasports.com for details. I know a bunch of the RotoWire football contingent just got out to Circa today to do some stuff over there. So stay tuned for some streams, I think like all day Thursday on our RotoWire YouTube channel. We'll have some great stuff coming to you from Circa. We also got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire, and we're on to the next. So a couple second rounders that I had in mind as players that I was drafting fairly aggressively earlier on that now I've kind of held off on, found some different pivots, and we'll get to those pivots a little bit later. But Saquon Barkley and Chris Olave are 2 guys that I thought had really good, ADPs earlier on, and now I'm a little bit less convinced that they're able to ultimately return that investment price. But your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, so if we were to get further into our list of players that we're lower on now, one of mine would be Derek Carr, and Chris Olave, I think, had all along been limited a little bit. His upside was limited a little bit by Derek Carr. The struggles of probably the New Orleans offensive line this year, which looks like it might somehow be worse than it was last year, and it was not that good. It was bad last year. So Olave, he's a guy who, if he was on some other offense, I could see him being even like the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Not that I'd rank him as the top receiver in the league. It's just if his luck were a little better, if everybody else's luck was a little worse one year, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing. But the Saints being as they are, Derek Carr being as he is, the offensive line being as bad as it looks like it'll be, I'd be pretty shocked if Olave got to 1,300 yards this year, which, is to say the median range might be more like 1,100 yards. But maybe I'm underselling Carr. I just think they're going to have to run the ball a lot to protect that offensive line, and I'm not expecting Carr to get by on efficiency.
I'm not either. I think, Olave is set up to have, one of the higher target shares in the league. I think that is still true, but I don't know, at a certain point, like the target quality does matter as well, especially when you're aiming this high in the draft. I think something similar could be said for Malik Neighbors, who goes around later. It's like, yeah, he's going to be like the engine of that passing game, but the catalyst is Daniel Jones, and we have a car that's not going to start a lot of the time.
Yeah, Neighbors, I think we were both kind of worried about that from the outset. And I guess in my own case, as it relates to Olave, the doom brain didn't really set in until, I don't know why, but about a month ago. Maybe it was when I heard that they were, not that I heard it, it was reported as news when they reported that Talius Fuaga was going to be playing left tackle. That was one of those things that was like, that can't possibly be what you were trying to do this whole time. Something kind of went wrong, and now this is the best you can think of. And it's not Fuaga's fault, and Fuaga might be okay for all I know, but the right tackle spot at best is a question, even if Fuaga is not at left tackle. Dennis Allen talking about Kendra Miller, that might have been what it was. Dennis Allen is pretty clearly the 2023 Josh McDaniels of 2024 is Dennis Allen, pretty clearly.
Yeah, it could, if things go bad, if like they drop a game to the Panthers early on in the season. I want to say they open against the Panthers, and like
I
if
bet they'll lose. Is it at
yeah,
home or on the road? Because if I
it
guess
is
if
at
it's in,
home.
all right, they might be safe because it's at home, but the Panthers are going to be a more focused and like bought in team, I think.
I think that the line in that one's like 4.5. Like if the Saints like eke out a field goal win at home against the Panthers in week 1, like that's just gonna kind of set a pretty bad tone for the rest of the season, kind of be that bad harbinger. As far as Saquon, where are you on your exposure rate to him, your approach to drafting him in best ball, and are you with me where it's like I'm not aggressively targeting him, like I'm more so in preferring to take a Jonathan Taylor, or if I have a later draft slot, someone like an Achane.
Yeah, Barkley is a player that I don't have a whole lot of, and I'm a little anxious about that because I definitely believe in his ability. And if the offensive line for the Eagles stays healthy, it should be pretty easily the best offensive line that he's had in the NFL. So as long as Jalen Hurts doesn't look like second half Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley should be one of those totally fine and maybe better picks in the first 15 selections. But as you kind of maybe anticipated, I've more so picked Jonathan Taylor in that scenario. And it's not like it's not that close either. It's probably like when I'm not taking Taylor there, I'm picking some receiver and not even Barkley, So it's not an intentional thing, and maybe I'll regret it very quickly this year. But I don't know. It's going to be a worse Philly offensive line than last year, not just because of Kelsey being retired, but if they have to start a guy like Mekhi Becton at right guard, and if Tyler Steen isn't looking good at right guard to the extent that they're moving Becton over there, that's kind of an eerie thing to see. So that's again, I don't mean to bring these things up to like discourage selecting Barkley, just to kind of explain why I've more so taken Taylor there.
And who is your preferred receiver in the second round? In that Saquon and Olave range, is there someone that you find yourself more regularly targeting there?
All right, so the line was probably Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, and so the alternatives were probably just Drake London, Marvin Harrison, maybe Nico. I might have taken Nico over Saquon one, maybe two times in best ball, but Harrison London is generally where I would draw that line, and I have London ahead of Harrison. So if I had to guess, if my first choice was taking Taylor there, my second choice might have been taking London, and like third, maybe taking Barkley.
Yeah, I'm fairly invested in one Drake London this year, so I'm hoping that ends up panning out.
But I do like Barkley. I really don't mean to discourage him at all. It's just kind of not where I'm going personally.
Fair. And then this one's a little bit more esoteric, but I did want to bring it up regardless, as someone that I was drafting a lot earlier on and much less so now. He's kind of falling into the late 18th, occasionally going undrafted at this point, and I'd probably advise him to go undrafted at this point. But Ravens rookie Tez Walker, my thinking initially was, like you have the starting loadout where you have Zay Flowers on the field side. You have Rashad Bateman playing kind of like that short intermediate role. And I thought that Walker would kind of come in and be like that deep threat component from the boundary. But it seems like, whether it's been injuries, I know he's had some banged up ribs, and just kind of general learning curve, I don't know if he's necessarily like in the Ravens offensive plans anytime soon. And like no one likes to hear this, but like Nelson Aguilar is going to play a lot of snaps.
Yeah, Walker's going to go into the season pretty low on the depth chart. He might be inactive on some game days if he hasn't gotten reps as a gunner. I don't know what his status is there. But in best ball, I think it's still okay to take Walker, especially if you've already taken Lamar. I think it's okay to take Devontez Walker in something like, I don't know, the 18th, if you have a bigger format than that. Maybe around the same range, maybe a little later. But he's a guy who, in best ball, the whole draw in the first place was that he has the speed to strike a touchdown from pretty much anywhere on the field, and he doesn't need much target volume to give you some games with double-digit fantasy points. And I still think that's true. It's a long season. Rashad Bateman's had enough injury problems, obviously. Nelson Aguilar is not really durable either. So as much as I think Deontay Hardy might actually play more than people expect, I think Hardy's going to be kind of like their downfield guy from probably the slot when applicable, when there is a rep along those lines. And Walker's going to be their main downfield guy on the boundary, or at least if Walker's not their main downfield guy on the boundary, then it would have to be Bateman again or something. And that would suck because I think he showed last year he just doesn't really have the downfield range to thrive in that kind of role. So
nope.
I think Monken will be a little stingy because Walker's a rookie initially, but that speed just has to play. And I mean, even if Walker is limited, it was never the case that he needed 60 snaps in a game to be useful in best ball, But in redraft, I don't see any reason to pick Walker. It would have to be a very deep league.
Yeah, exactly. So I've slowed the best ball drumbeat on Walker. I definitely still see your point, and that's why I was drafting him in the first place. But it just feels like he couldn't have generated less buzz this training camp, and maybe that's dumb of me to put stock into that. But I don't know. It's not looking good, at least early on. Whereas like last year with Keaton Mitchell, it's like, okay, he's going to start the year on the PUP list, but like I know the second that he's healthy, like we're going to be good to go. I don't mean to question the recollection there, but I personally at the time, I remember being surprised, almost like, optimistically, happily surprised that the Ravens kept Mitchell on the week 1 roster. I thought going into cut downs, they might cut him. So I don't know. It could change over the course of the year. And again, injuries can push a guy like Walker from 6 to 3. And then at that point, if the Ravens are just trying to be practical and they're like, okay, we got to get a big play here. Why don't we throw it to that guy who hasn't done anything all year and see if he can do that one trick he can sometimes do in practice. And sometimes that's how players like him get their foot in the door. Okay. Keep an eye on that. Let's move on to the sunnier side of this with some guys that we find ourselves targeting a little bit more as we get closer to week 1 and the close of draft season. But before that, got a message from our friends over at Fantasy Sports Knockout. Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept is simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league. But you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player one time. The lowest weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest every week. The concept may be simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Are you going to load up early, or play the matchups and save the better players for later? Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up and play at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. Also got a message from our good friends at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your league had, or features that are missing from your current fantasy leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college fantasy leagues. I am in 2 college fantasy leagues as we speak. The RotoWire one still ongoing. That's a 20-rounder with 20 teams, and it's a slow draft. So as you can imagine, we're going in. It's taking a long time, but we're almost done. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league. Invite your friends and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Are you coming from another service? That's not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues or rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax Commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league. Plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing league for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, we're going to end on a higher note. we're going to get to some guys that we are targeting a little bit more as draft season unfolds. I'm going to throw one out to you. It was one that I was a little dubious on when our eyes adjusted, tournaments opened, and we saw that Marvin Harrison was not somebody that you could wait even into the third round on. He was someone that was going mid-second round, right from the jump once he got drafted by the Cardinals. Now he's officially someone with a first-round ADP on Underdog. I'm okay with drafting him. I'm definitely okay with taking him. And, for instance, there are trade-offs. I'm taking him instead of, and again, it's kind of a tricky range. If you draw that draft slot anywhere between 9 and 12 in your drafts, there's no like great options, at least jumping out right off the jump. But I think I prefer Harrison in that format to guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, maybe even AJ Brown and Puka Nacua.
The Nacua thing is a little complicated from the injury. I don't know what to make of it exactly. I get the AJ Brown concern. I probably keep AJ Brown ahead of Harrison either way, though, just because of I figure even if the Eagles are worse than they have been the past couple of years, AJ Brown's just kind of one of those monsters who will transcend the situation. Harrison, it is quite a price to pay for a rookie receiver. We've seen guys like Megatron, even the rookie years, do not a whole lot, still turn out incredible. Devontae Adams' first 2 seasons were just awful, So,
yep.
With that said, there's no chance, in my opinion, of Harrison's rookie season turning out like either of theirs. Or if it were the case, then the Cardinals would throw for like 3,100 yards this year, which I think they'll beat that mark. I think 4,100 is within reach, and Harrison having something like 1,200 yards would be enough to get them into that conversation. I think certainly. I'd imagine like Kyler Murray's career high is around there or something. So it's the best situation Murray has had. Certainly, I think that Harrison, even if he doesn't draw more than like 27% of the targets, he'll be an efficient target. He'll be above the team baseline probably. And I guess the one thing I would say that might hold back Harrison, that maybe won't hold back some other players in his range, is I don't know if the Cardinals are going to throw the ball that much. Like Garrett Wilson, obviously he's not going to throw that much with the Jets, but guys like Nacua can kind of get that monster target volume just from kind of like the way the offense works, whereas we don't know for sure how the Cardinals are going to use Harrison. But I guess if Harrison had a rookie year like Jamar Chase's rookie year, it couldn't be too shocking at this point, especially with Harrison unsurprisingly looking really good in training camp.
Well said. I don't know. I'm optimistic. I kind of have found that I am the Cardinals optimist this year. I think among the teams that finished last in their divisions last year, I think that they have the best chance to move up in the pecking order. Not to say that they're going to win the division or anything like that, but I don't think they're bottom feeders anymore. And I think the Cardinals generally are a team that you can kind of get pieces of at each stage of the draft. It's certainly a big price to pay early on to get a rookie like Harrison, but you should be positioned to get a McBride a couple rounds later. You can definitely still get Kyler Murray without having to jump ADP too much. And, if you wanted to go wild and, tack on James Conner or even in the later game, a Michael Wilson, the Cardinals do kind of have that at every turn of the draft. So I've found myself just getting exposure to this offense and consider me pretty optimistic about it.
Yeah, same here. I think for me, them and the Chargers are teams where I've kind of drafted a lot of the people on them just because the market is just too low on them as a group. And especially in best ball, those guys over volume, I think are going to be a nice cushion to a portfolio if that turns out to be the case.
Fingers crossed. Who's a player out of Jacksonville that has kind of gotten back into your good graces as the summer's gone on?
Yeah, I was always a big fan of Travis Etienne, but I was concerned about the price being higher than last year, probably by quite a bit. Last year there was, of course, the ridiculous arguments about whether Etienne was good or whether he was bad at catching the ball, holding onto the ball. bad at short yardage. All that stuff, of course, turned out to be nonsense. So I understand in that sense why Etienne's price tag is higher this year. But it just feels weird to be drafting a running back as high as Etienne has gone when they averaged 3.8 yards per carry last year. And when the offensive coordinator, the play caller, Press Taylor, was so disturbingly bad last year. So I still don't have a whole lot of Etienne. I kind of want to get more real quick before these lineups lock, because again, I never doubted Etienne the player. I doubted the circumstances and the new price. But the more I think about it lately, even if Press Taylor is exactly as bad or maybe even worse than last year, there's still no way Etienne is averaging less than 4 yards a carry. It just isn't happening. There's no way to make an offense that bad that Etienne stays under 4 yards a carry 2 years in a row. So if only by variance, I was like, okay, he's going to be at least like 4.3, probably 4.4, probably more than that. And especially probably more than that if Brian Thomas, obviously the first rounder out of LSU, if he can keep safeties a little further back, give defenses a little bit more to worry about for cheating against the run the way they were last year. I mean, defenses last year just had it so easy, stress-free, playing the Jaguars offense. Just everything was simple. You knew where all the offensive pieces were going to be all the time. You could set a watch to it. And now with Thomas's speed there, it's like, yeah, maybe the plays are still a little predictable, but they didn't have a downfield, a rangy downfield threat from the boundary last year. And that meant that the defenses could keep two safeties in the box pretty much all the times with impunity. They might try the same thing this year, but there might be a penalty this time, which, one or two times Thomas going deep in the first 4 weeks of the year, that's probably enough to make the defenses play differently the rest of the way. And if Etienne gets just a little more help than last year, he is awesome, in my opinion.
He is. I mean, over the last decade or so, I think only Jonathan Taylor had like a better running back college career than Etienne, or I might be missing somebody, but
pretty much just Barry Sanders had a better college career at running back than Etienne, and even that's kind of debatable.
I mean, it was electric every time he touched the ball at Clemson. I don't think that player is gone. I think, to your point, last year, especially after Christian Kirk went out, it was such a shrunken offense, and the additions of Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas both, I think, are just huge additions there, and something that, like you said, is going to give defenses more reason to kind of back off and not necessarily crowd the box to where Etienne is just getting caught at the line constantly, because there is going to be more varied threats in that passing game. I think I'm definitely underweight on Etienne, and to your point, need to correct that. I think I only have one share on underdog of Etienne.
Yeah,
that makes me feel
I'm
icky.
shamefully light on Etienne and Derrick Henry shares for someone who's a big fan of them both.
I just started to draft in like a slow draft. I think it's in the puppy over on underdog, and kind of doing the crazy thing where I'm kind of loading up on running backs early, and I got McCaffrey and Derrick Henry on the same team. I don't know. We'll see.
Hey, it pays. It sometimes pays to get weird in those things. It's that one millionaire maker lineup like 5 years ago or whatever was like Brock Osweiler and Albert Wilson driven. There are no wrong answers. Almost no wrong answers anyway.
Albert Wilson, that guy was cool. Let's see. Moving on. I think I've also sticking with running backs in like the higher rounds. I wasn't totally sure what to make of Achane's ADP. He's someone that's going early third, late second, and now I've decided that I'm very okay with it. And when he's available, when I'm up in that range, I'm taking him, fairly regularly. I think
is that in redraft too, John?
In redraft too.
Okay.
I think he is, quote unquote, better in best ball, because there are going to be those weeks where, he gets nicked up, or just the 10 touches don't magically convert into 150 yards from scrimmage like they do in other weeks. So, I mean, that hurts a little bit, but, I think mostly through best ball, but still, as far as redraft goes, I'm comfortable having, plenty of Achane in my portfolio and good with the price. But I guess my question for you is, do you agree there? And how do you approach the rest of like your backfield build when you do kind of go with a guy who's, perilously low floor, but shriekingly high upside.
In Achane's case, my opinion hasn't changed over the course of draft season, but in best ball, I always thought, even if it's kind of risky by conventional reasoning, it's still worth getting some level of exposure to De'Von Achane at the general market rate, ideally later than in the ADP, but even at the general market rate, especially in best ball, I think there's the compelling part of Achane where you just can't rule anything out in a given week. Sometimes that can be more in the negative. Like he really might have some games this year where it's just like 6 carries for 36 yards and they put him back in bubble wrap. That could happen. Because also Jalen Wright and probably Raheem Mostert are also quite capable in that scheme. So they don't need Achane, but if he's going to have weeks like some of his, let's say his top 3 weeks, even aside from the Denver game last year, that's a level of explosiveness that maybe has not been seen in the NFL, like ever on a per touch basis. It's almost like he's putting up numbers in the NFL that Dree Archer was putting up that 1 year at Kent State, where it's just like, 9 yards a carry, 18 touchdowns. It's like, oh, that's stupid. That would never happen in the NFL. And Achane kind of was exactly that last year. So as much as I can't quite believe or even imagine how he could sustainably do that, I also don't have any solid evidence that he can't. So in redraft, I get a little more stingy about it because I in the second round, I don't want to tolerate those 3.6 point weeks. That's just a high price to eat it, even if the rest of your roster is just killing it, and even if the big weeks outweigh the bad, it's just that's almost like one of your highest, your most expensive starters just like leaving a game in the first quarter and not coming back, like a third of the year or something. So if it's framed that way, I get a little more like I don't really have the courage to take him in the second. But in best ball, it's just like as simple as if he has a 40-point week and he has 5 or 6 other 30-point ones, you're going to wish you had some exposure to him, even if he also has dud weeks and pretty much all the rest.
So let's scoot on over. Got a couple more guys to touch on. Jalen Tolbert. This is his 3rd year out of South Alabama, playing in a Dallas offense that we know is going to be throwing it heavily, and they didn't replace the Gallup role. You still have Brandon Cooks and CeeDee Lamb there, of course, and Jake Ferguson. I think a lot of people are expecting to take on a bigger role in that offense. But I think even still, where Tolbert goes in best ball drafts is far too late, especially for what could be a pretty sizable role for him.
Right. I think at his price, you don't need to ask yourself the question, is Tolbert even good? Like he could be not very good, some replaceable sub-replacement level player, and yet he still outranks the 4th or 5th person so easily that it just seems, barring a trade or something, it's just a given that Dallas needs Tolbert on the field for probably something like, I don't know, 800 snaps, maybe more this year, depending on the durability of Brandon Cooks. So that's just kind of a big snap count, regardless of what his talent level might be. That's a big snap count for a guy like Tolbert to be, in a Dak Prescott offense and be going that late. So I have quite a bit of Tolbert at this point. I've kind of been taking him all off season, sort of mindlessly early on, and then later when I started to look at it more, like after I had taken Tolbert a bunch of times and I started wondering like, was that a bad idea? I looked a little closer, convinced myself actually it was a good idea, and so I was taking him the whole time, but now I take him with a little more confidence than I did back in like May or whatever.
Yeah, I've definitely done a lot of shopping in that range of the draft as far as receivers go. I've got a ton of Jermaine Burton, a ton of Michael Wilson, a ton of Jalen Tolbert, and Rashad Bateman are all guys that I'm up over 20% on.
Yeah, I definitely prefer Tolbert out of that group. Have some level of hope for all those guys, but it's just one of those things like, especially after we saw how Noah Brown did that 1 year with Dallas, after spending 4 years just kind of hanging around, not doing anything. And after not doing anything at Ohio State before that too, just hanging around and being there that long, I guess maybe the familiarity with Dak Prescott sort of just made Brown get some numbers by default. And Tolbert should be at least that same case this year. And I think with more explosiveness in the numbers, if only because he's supposed to be a bit of a downfield guy. He's not hanging out 6 yards off the line of scrimmage. He's more so getting 10 plus.
Yeah, I had a tweet about Jalen Tolbert back in the COVID year 2020. I think it was like a prisoner of the moment. Like South Alabama was like the only game on, or like the first game of that season, and he caught a long touchdown. I'm like, just give him the Biletnikoff. Give it to him now. Devontae Smith won the Heisman that year, but Tolbert should have been considered nonetheless. Lastly, there's some disappointing news. I think some people had some optimism on Jelani Woods. I mean, very kind of interesting profile of his from OK State and Virginia. We don't see players that tall and oftentimes that productive at tight end in college come in. Hasn't gone great, and now he's got the turf toe, so we don't know when he's going to be back. How does that impact your view of the Indianapolis passing game, and who kind of moves up as a result of this?
Yeah, it sucks for me. I definitely have. I probably have like $100 and something worth of teams with Jelani Woods on them, and now I wish I could change them all to Kylen Granson, who I previously thought was kind of a bum. And I guess I still do. I don't know what's going on with Woods. Before his toe injury, it was even sounding bad, like behind not just Granson, but Mo Alley-Cox and maybe Drew Ogletree, maybe Will Mallory. So if I had to guess if there's a specific reason why Woods was all of a sudden on the bubble with the Colts, it's that Will Mallory, even though he was a really late draft pick, he's quite athletic and was a productive pass catcher in college. So if there was a receiving specialist tight end role with the Colts, and if there was only one player who could have it, maybe it was Mallory who was kind of putting some pressure on Woods, who's kind of never been a consistent or punctual player. He's more been like the kind of player who you deal with, you tolerate the ups and downs because he'd make some big plays occasionally that you would see and kind of figure like not many guys can do that for the reasons, like you said, being pushing like 6'8" or whatever, running the low 4.6. Woods can threaten the seam really well on things like post routes and, especially off the play action, but he can't do more intermediate type stuff. So those were the fears with him coming out, and like hands not being so great, being a bad blocker, even though he's kind of a huge tight end. Those were the concerns, but it's still kind of shocking to me that he went from his rookie year, catching 25 of 40 targets on just 318 snaps. So totally solid efficiency, especially with the 3 touchdowns, to getting hurt and then apparently not making the Colts roster. That's I guess in hindsight, it was just a way worse pick than any of us thought, but maybe I don't know, maybe Woods can get back from this toe injury in time to do something for some other team in the second half, but it's more likely looking like it's just kind of another wasted year for him. Maybe a decent season for Granson. I mean, as much as I don't like Granson, playing with Anthony Richardson or even Joe Flacco is a huge upgrade from having to catch passes from Minshew all year.
That it is. And I thought that, among when it comes to Granson's skill set, I mean, he had a lot of really productive years at SMU. I thought he was really nice, productive player there. Obviously, we're talking about an SMU team from years ago at this point, American Athletic Conference versus the NFL. But yeah, it's not an overly imposing tight end depth chart in Indianapolis, especially if Woods is out of the way. So I think that, I can definitely give the stamp of approval on a Kylen Granson share or two. Before we get out of here, Mario, got some plugs for the RotoWire YouTube channel. Tomorrow we got some semblance of a marathon going on, so you guys are definitely going to want to tune in for that. We've got shows for updated quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end rankings running pretty much all afternoon, getting started at 2 o'clock Eastern. The last one, the tight end show, kicks off at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then later on tonight, little overexposure Wednesday for your pal Johnny here. I will be streaming my RotoWire online championship draft, the Beat John McKechnie League. That will get started at 8 o'clock tonight. So if you'd be so kind, come join me. I'll be streaming and talking through my picks and pointing out how far behind I am the 8 ball with various foolish draft decisions that I make. I wish you could join me, Mario, but I believe you're on XM tonight. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, I idiotically said I would help. I would call into John's thing at some point, but literally the exact same time as you, I'm on the radio with Todd Zola today. So sorry about that.
Well, everybody, just get the YouTube stream going on one screen, and then get the XM show going on. I don't know, however else you listen to XM. I guess there is a Sirius XM app, if I remember correctly from my XM days. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, again, presented by our friends over at Circa and over on the Blue Wire Network.